Welcome to this first episode of the Sailing Science Center podcast. Our guest for this episode is none other than John Arndt, the owner and publisher of Latitude 38, the Bay Area's premier sailing magazine. This podcast is being done in conjunction with the September issue of the Sailing Science Center News, in which John is the subject of the monthly spotlight. The theme of the issue is inspiration, which we will be talking about later in this interview. When it comes to inspiration, there is no person better than John and no magazine better than Latitude 38 to provide that. While his name might be less well known than some racing sailors, for more than 40 years, John has been one of the most influential and inspiring personalities in sailing. Starting with his first sailing experience in utero during the summer before his December birth, John was born into an East Coast sailing family with sailing grandparents who lived in Maine. John's first boat was a styrofoam sea Snark. He graduated from that to a Turnabout, a 420, and his grandfather's Rhodes 19, which the family still owns today. John began to show his leadership inclination at the University of Vermont, where he was the president of the University Sailing Club. Then, taking a year off from college, John and his brother and a friend sailed his uncle's Camper Nicholson 35 from the East Coast to Venezuela and all through the Caribbean. Coming to California in 1984, it took just 3 short years before John signed on as an ad salesman for Latitude 38, the local sailing magazine that was founded by Richard Spindler and his wife Kathy a decade earlier. In 2001, John founded Summer Sailstice, a new world holiday that encouraged everyone to go sailing. During the financial crisis in 2009, John founded the Sailing Renaissance, an industry group dedicated to reviving and promoting sailing. I remember the first Sailing Renaissance meeting in which John quoted Winston Churchill declaring that we should never let a good crisis go to waste. In 2015, John received the Distinguished Service Award at the Annapolis Boat Show, and in 2016, he purchased Latitude 38 to become its owner and publisher. So please give a big welcome to John Arndt. John, welcome.
Well, Jim, that's great to hear that all lined up, and thanks for inviting me on the show. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And one thing that, I thought about in preparing for this interview is that any time that I walked into a room and saw John Arndt, I was always happy to see you. You were just somebody who always put a smile on my face and warmed every room that I saw you in. And, the thing I like most about doing the interviews for the Sailing Science Center Spotlights is getting to know our subject. And what I was surprised to learn from my research for this interview is that you studied engineering in college, because you hadn't struck me as being the engineer type. Since this is the Sailing Science Center podcast, it seems like a particularly good fit. So I thought, well, let's start there and dive into that a little bit more and ask you, what type of engineering did you study in college, and do you still think of yourself as an engineer?
I don't think of myself as an engineer, but I did study management, manufacturing, engineering, and so it was sort of a bridge between the business side of a organization as well as the engineering side. So I really wasn't looking to become a design engineer as much as someone who would work with a manufacturing company and help them develop products, develop process flow, or work in the marketing department on engineering products. And that's actually largely what I did right after college. And I only went into it. I had a grandfather who was an engineer, an uncle who was a nuclear engineer, and I liked math and science in college, read lots of science fiction, I liked math and science in high school, I should say, and read a lot of science fiction. And so I really loved technology and still do. But as it turned out, after college and spending some time with General Electric and Fairchild Semiconductor, the sort of more eclectic world, entrepreneurial world of small business was more appealing, and I ended up just going a different direction. But like all of college, I think whatever you do in college, it builds a good foundation for your future life, regardless of what you study. And I think engineering helped shape me in great ways that are still helpful today, though I can't say I'm much use when it comes to engineering challenges.
Well, let's kind of work on that a little bit. It sounds like you had some inspiration to go into engineering. Did that come from your grandfather and uncle?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, and it was actually my grandfather who sailed was not the engineer. He was in advertising and marketing. So that may be why I eventually somewhat tilted in that direction. My grandfather on my mother's side was more the engineer, and he did a lot of design for General Electric. And his son, my mother's brother, was a nuclear engineer for General Electric. So I really enjoyed kind of what they brought to life and to the table, but I can't say that drove me exactly, except that I didn't know at the end of high school what I'd want to do. And engineering looked like something intriguing and interesting to follow. So that's what I did.
Yeah, good call on that. So going, to the other side of it, which is the sailing side, I'm interested in, what inspired you in that area, what experience or aspect of sailing uh, both inspired you in your early years, but even since then, what things have you found that have been most inspirational?
Well, largely two things, really. I mean, sailing to me just is a ton of fun. I love the freedom, escape, and getting out on the water. And I've loved that since I was a kid. It was always a great thing to do with my parents and even my grandparents. That Sunday afternoon sail in Maine, it was very much afternoon recreational sailing, but it was always just an enjoyable time. And then as I got more into sailing, growing up and racing, crewing deckhand on various race boats and doing some offshore racing or collegiate racing, I think the community of people you meet in sailing was also a real inspiration. And finally, I'd say that trip I took to Venezuela and back from Maine when I took a year off in college really helped me explore a different way of looking at life as well as a different inspiration for what I wanted to do. And that really opened my eyes to a sailing community beyond weekend sailing in Maine, beyond just a summer sailing. Hey, I found out you could sail and be warm in December, January, February, something I hadn't known before. And also, so that community of people I met then and there, and actually one of the people I met living in who was living in Antigua, lives down the street from me here in San Francisco, and is one of our best friends. So it really opened my eyes to a world far beyond the cove and shores that I sailed in as a kid, and every aspect of it was great pleasure. And again, I love connecting to the earth, nature, and the focus and attention that sailing requires and inspires. So it all wraps together in just a great lifestyle.
Yeah, your friend is a great example of how the sailing community is such a small and tight community, even on a world scale. You said that it gave you a different way of looking at life. I'd like to explore that a little bit more. In what way did sailing give you a different way of looking at life?
Well, I'd say largely connecting me to the earth more. I mean, one of the things when we went to Venezuela and back in the 70s, we didn't have all the modern conveniences that boats today have. We didn't have pressure water. We didn't have refrigeration. We navigated with a sextant. We could see the stars, which are hard to see, particularly now in the Bay Area with so much smoke around. But I think sailing out under the stars and across the oceans with limited food, limited fuel, limited water, just a small crew of people, really connects you in ways that, to me, like the earth around through space. I really connect it that way. I mean, we're out there in the solar system or in the universe as a small crew on a tiny planet with limited resources, limited water, fuel, energy, all these things. And we all have to sort of navigate the universe together on the earth. And to me, a ship at sea, a sailboat at sea, parallels that same mission. And when you're out there in the middle of an ocean, this is less true today, but when you're out in the middle of an ocean, there isn't help nearby. There's no 911 or there's no AAA that's going to pick you up. You have a little more help nearby today because of AIS and EPIRBs and all these things. But of course, the Earth has no one nearby that's going to help us out. So it's all up to us. So that's a big factor in the way I look at the world and look at life. Is really a great way to navigate it personally, together, and as a planet.
It sounds like sailing gave you a sense of confidence and self-sufficiency. Would that be an accurate summation?
Yes, I would say that too. I mean, I think when you're out there on your own, certainly, as we all know, duct tape is one of our greatest friends, and there's a load of things that you have to figure out how to do with the wrong tool or the wrong fastener or the wrong whatever you've got, but you still have to somehow use your ingenuity, use your teamwork, and figure out how to get things done and get where you're going. And I think out on a sailboat, and that can be true in college racing, it can be true when you're sailing across the bay. You can't just pull over to the nearest rest stop or the rest area nearby. You really have to solve things on the go and pay attention to your surroundings and your environment and adapt to whatever the world and conditions throw at you. And I think sailing is really hard to parallel. The only other thing I think that is sort of similar might be camping. But most other sports and activities have much more control over them and much more limitations. And I think sailing has a lot more freedom, but also freedom to get it wrong, freedom to get it right, but also the need to rely on yourself and your crew.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more strongly. And I know my own sailing experience had very much the same effect on me. Let's shift the conversation a little bit. You've been involved with Latitude 38 for 34 of its 44 years. So you've seen quite a bit of change over those 3.4 decades. How would you say the magazine Latitude 38, how has the voice changed over the years? And particularly, how has the voice of the magazine changed since you purchased it in 2016?
Well, it's changed, I think, hopefully not a lot in many people's eyes. I think journalism, media tries to reflect the world as it is. So it's changed in the way the world has changed in many ways. I think Richard did an incredible job creating a great culture, energy, spirit of the magazine. But I think at a fundamental level, he really loved to help people learn how to enjoy their boats, explore the world more, share stories, connect the West Coast sailing community, and do all the things that might help people learn and or explore or take bigger adventures, which was always great fun. And so that is an essential mission and essential effort we hope is pretty much the same. On the flip side, the world's changed a lot. We have, in the past, we ran a lot more, say, nudity. There were a lot of cruisers out there sailing naked. It's still lots of fun to sail naked today, but people sailing without clothes then would send us pictures of their cruising life. And it was a world that was maybe had a little freer spirit, and people were more willing to share themselves because they knew all of a sudden those pictures weren't going to be spread all across the internet. They might get into a magazine of limited circulation, might not get to mom for a while or whatever the concerns might be. But today, even if we got those pictures, we wouldn't publish them. Society's changed in ways that I think make it more difficult to reflect the full spectrum of things going on. But I think the fun and freedom of that, of course, that way you save water, you save laundry. but otherwise, I think we're going to try and cover what's going on. Last night I was at the Ronstadt Bridge to Bridge race, foiling kites, windsurfers, and wing sailors. This is something that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago, really. And as the world evolves, there's new things coming into the sport, new activities. Yet the tried and true things that we covered, like heading south to Mexico or an afternoon sail in the bay or cruise up the Delta, largely remain the same. So we hope to cover those things, still bring a smile to people's face, and help them enjoy it on a day-to-day basis, or as frequently as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring out the nudity, because I think one of the things editorially that Richard would do was to publish things that seemed to be intentionally controversial. And it wasn't just the nudity, but oftentimes, his responses in the letters would, how would I say, seem almost intentionally abrasive is not quite the right word, but designed to create a reaction.
Yeah.
And that actually was part of the appeal. It's like, oh, look what he said to this guy, right?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, he was definitely a bit of a provocateur, but I think also incredibly insightful and had a great ability to pick apart people's perspectives and arguments about various issues. And of course, we did have a letter a while ago that said, from someone who said, we missed Richard's voice. And of course, he did a great job. And that's something I can't offer. I don't have those same skills and abilities. I think he did a great job with that, but we hope to do the best we can and bring a different point of view and different perspectives. But it was one of the great aspects of the magazine. We try and do the best we can with that. But of course, I think he was truly a master. And it's one of the things that drew me to the magazine. And one of the things that made it a pleasure always to work there was the challenges he'd throw out and the challenges the sailing world offered. It was always fun, and we try and reflect that as best we can, but with new voices and different backgrounds and abilities.
That's how things go. They evolve, and we get new leadership, and the culture changes, society changes, and we have to change with it. Latitude 38, from what I've been able to see, has been just a remarkably successful magazine that, even while we call it a Bay Area sailing magazine, I know that when my wife and I were out cruising, and of course we heard stories from elsewhere as well, that, if a cruiser flew back to the States, everybody would ask, hey, can you pick up some Latitudes and bring them back with you? And they'd bring them back and, be everybody's best friend. And if I got a copy, I would just sit there and read it and, cover to cover until it was done. What do you think the factors were that contributed so much to Latitude's success? Why was it that, cruisers around the world, and it really was it had and has world reach. What do you think has contributed to that?
Well, a number of factors. I do think the initial style, it's very different. We like to cover people and the adventures more than the products. We like to write about things people are doing rather than things people want to buy. So I think that's very attractive. I mean, there's always, and of course, these days you can just Google and get product reviews, Yelp reviews of everything out there. You can get YouTube videos on how to set a spinnaker, but it's really harder to connect with the people in our community. And I think the California style and voice, and California itself has a good brand, so to speak. So I think that helped carry it further around the world. And Richard did a great job, and he had a great team with him. I mean, we have great writers, a great effort at making things fun, again, enjoyable. The production team always tried to do a really good job as far as layout. I think Richard, when he laid the magazine out initially, people familiar with our sighting section would see that it makes no frigging sense in the way it's laid out. But I think Richard was like, how do magazines do it? Let's see, I'll do the exact opposite, or try and take everything inside out and backwards. And I do think that it turns your brain on in a different way. And I think that's great. And of course, when Latitude 38 started, 1977, the sailboat market was booming. San Francisco is an awesome place to sail, and one of the world sailing meccas. Costa Mesa, Santa Cruz were building tons of boats. The ultralights were just starting to be built with Merlin. And the Cal 40 had already been making waves, and Catalina Yachts was rocking and rolling in the world. So there was a lot of sailing energy coming out of California, and Latitude 38 helped share that story and the people that were taking off with it. I mean, Lynn and Larry Pardee transformed a lot of the cruising world with their cruising stories, and they built their boat in Southern California. And the West Sail 32 took loads of bohemian cruisers, do-it-yourselfers across the planet, and those were coming out of California as well. So I think there was just a ton of things that were sort of somewhat put the wind at our backs, but also I think Richard had a really good energy, and the team he had around him really cared a lot and still do about the value of sailing and the quality of the products and the types of stories we put out. So to me, it was a combination of factors. It's hard to get it right with just one thing, but we took a best advantage of everything that was going our way, just like a sailor might. Try and get in the right current, the right wind, and go the right direction.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of tie this into the theme that I'm trying to create here, which is of inspiration, I would say that by showing people by showing readers what other people are doing, you're inspiring those readers that they could do it too, and actually contributed a lot to the whole culture.
Yeah, I guess that's another thing I'd be remiss to not mention is how much our readers contribute and today and always have. I mean, Richard, I think, did not try and build big personalities around who the authors are or who the writers at Latitude 38 were. I think a number one thing we tried to do is put the people in the story out first, and they sent us a lot of their pictures of themselves cruising, their do-it-yourself job that they're doing on their boats, and we really want people to experience the life of real sailors, from California sailors, people from our community, but how they live. And so we just want to help tell their story and be a conduit to sharing their story, but not be the story ourselves. And of course, that's one of the reasons the sailing community is so much fun, is it's filled with interesting people. People who've just gotten back from sailing around the world, people who've gone single-handed down to, I don't know, Cabo San Lucas on a Hobie Cat, all kinds of things that people do on sailboats and adventures they take. They're a really interesting crowd of people. And of course, if you can help those interesting people get seen and have their stories told, then you've got an interesting magazine, I think.
Yeah, I think so, very much so, because it is, a genuine and authentic voice of the readers, or the people that the readers want to emulate. So, looking at uh, looking at what has happened with sailing over the past 34 years, um, you've pointed out in other podcasts that there was a peak in sailing at around 1979, and that now we're seeing some decline in it. What do you see as the trajectory for sailing going forward, say the next decade to 2 decades? Do you have a vision for that?
Well, of course, I have a vision for a lot of things, and very few of them actually come true. But if I were to be able to choose that vision, I think it's going to continue to be a really powerful element in many people's lives, and can be a powerful force for good everywhere. Sailing, to me, still inspires a lot of adventurers and a lot of explorers, a lot of people to live a different way. And so I think sailing is going to continue to be perhaps a smaller share of the market than it once was, but still an important component of so many people's lives. And I really think the pandemic has highlighted the opportunity for people to have have enjoyment with sailing and rediscover the bay that's right next door here in the Bay Area. I mean, when we're not flying around the world and jumping on Southwest Airlines to have a 3-day weekend somewhere, we're actually close to home and close to one of the best sailing areas in the world, and realize we don't have to put carbon into the atmosphere to just get down to the shoreline and jump on a sailboat and really get away. And I think that's what people have forgotten, is how close a getaway is when you live near a bay. And so I think the pandemic is really helping do that. And I also think the YouTube channels, Instagram, and so many other channels that exist, podcasts as well. Thank you again. I think are helping more people discover sailing in ways they didn't. I mean, it kind of amazes me, having grown up in that period of time when sailing was at a peak, millions of people sailing, a lot more people sailing. I mean, really, it's declined by almost 80% in participation since 1979. That for some reason or another, many people didn't carry on like I did. I never not sailed. My kids have sailed since birth. And I think when people can find the time, it's really an enjoyable thing. And I do think that's one of the things we're going to have to do as a sailing community and or industry is reconnect people to a simpler way of sailing, because that's when sailing was popular, was when people were sailing Santana 22s or Sunfish or Snarks or Catalina 22s. I mean, it was a lot of small boat sailing, very simple boats and very casual weekends. And I think that's what people really need to reconnect with. But unfortunately, I think a wealthier country that's driven by a lot by two-income families. People are having to work hard. They're paying more for their homes. There's a lot of societal forces that are putting pressure on it, and then development forces on the waterfront that make it really hard to keep sailing inexpensive, because a lot of waterfront access is being turned into condos, with patios that look at the bay but don't necessarily provide access to it.
How do you think the shared economy might play into this? And I'm thinking of, instead of being the more hobbyist sailor where you're building and outfitting your own boat, instead you go to one of the local clubs and you rent a boat, and that seems to be, at least in my perception of sailing, gaining traction. Is that something that you see as well?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, one of the good things about the world is that there have been such an evolution in the way you can participate. I mean, we've had community sailing programs since the beginning of sailing, probably. I mean, you could go down to any small community and find municipal docks with small boats and sea scouts and sailing programs that have been around forever. But I do think more sophisticated programs offering newer boats and more complete sailing classes and certifications is another great path. I mean, Club Nautique and Inspire Sailing, Modern Sailing, so many schools around the bay and on any coastline or any body of water provide access that wasn't wasn't so available. There wasn't so many of these schools years ago. And they provide a pathway for many others, and shared ownership, chartering. There's so many different ways that didn't exist when I was a kid. And so I think that's only for the better. And I think for me, still having your own boat is still the best way to go, because if I want to go sailing at 3 o'clock right now, boom, I can go. And you also get the complete experience of managing a boat, which for many people, not everybody, but for many people, it's a lot of fun to tinker with a boat. And that's an aspect that you're not going to do in a club. And for some people, of course, that's perfect. They don't want to do that. So I think the variety of ways there are to participate, to get in, is great and only expanding. And I think many people too, as Anthony Sandberg at OCSC used to say, you don't need to own a swimming pool to go swimming. You don't need to own a tennis court to play tennis, and you don't need to own a sailboat to go sailing. And of course, most sailboats require multiple crew and have only one owner. So the ratio is usually one person paying to 3 to 5 riding along for free, or low cost, no cost.
Yeah, I think that that tinkering aspect is something that's highlighting the engineer in you. um, but if I can play a little bit of the provocateur, as it were, to challenge something that's often said is about the perception of sailing being for rich white guys, and I'm going to risk being politically incorrect if I say that, and point out that the average NASCAR costs about $300,000, while you can get a used J24 for about $5,000 and a used Laser for about $1,500. Meaning that the financial barrier to entering sailing is orders of magnitude less than getting into auto racing. Yet NASCAR doesn't suffer that rich white guy perception problem that sailing does. Why do you think there is that gap? Why do you think we have that perception problem with sailing, but you've got other things that are vastly more expensive that don't have that perception problem?
Well, yeah, it's partly cultural. I think sailors, I mean, for one, there is an element of truth to it. A lot of attention goes to the America's Cup and the big yacht clubs that run big regattas. Of course, they have press agents and they demand a lot of attention for the activities they run. And so when sailing gets put out there, a lot of what you see is rich white men having fun sailing. Of course, those of us who are in sailing and grew up in sailing know that that's a misperception. I mean, there certainly is a rich white element to sailing. But if you go to the All-American game of baseball and sit in the bleachers, you can look up at the box seats and look at where the billionaires sit and know that baseball is a rich white man's sport, perhaps, or that many of the players are being paid millions and millions and more dollars than the people sitting in the bleachers. But baseball is seen as an everyman sport. Sailing, on the other hand, too, since I'm in the media, we sell advertising. One of the things we like to tell advertisers is that sailing has a pretty good demographic, and people love to share that story that we are a highly educated group, typically, that we've got a higher incomes. But as I grew up, as I said, my family boat was a Rhodes 19. Our first boat was a Snark. And I think the 60s and 70s sailing was much more of a blue collar activity or everyday activity than it is today. And I think sailing itself is partly because of the cost of waterfront and so many other pressures. The manufacturers and sailing companies have really had to figure out how to make a living, and they realize they can make more money or keep their business afloat by selling a 50-foot boat versus a 20-foot boat. And so the advertising and a lot of the marketing that gets built around sailing gets built around sustainability for the companies, and that's not necessarily good for the sport. And the other thing, because there's so many engineers, rocket scientists, tinkers, and others that love sailing, I mean, one thing is many sailors love to tinker. And again, the Ron Stamp bridge to bridge last night, you're out there and you're watching these boats foil and these high-tech sails and all these things. The technology has been really exciting, really fun, can make sailing easier and more accessible, but at the same time, much more expensive. A sunfish to me on a lake is still just as much fun as it always was. And I don't need a foiling boat to go fast or carbon fiber hulls and sails and all these things, but they are fun, but they do drive the cost of the boat up. And that's just part of human nature. I think it's sort of a conspiracy of human nature as we want to continue to upgrade. And as we do that, we put things out of reach to more people. And so I think, while we say technology has made sailing easier, I think every step up in technology has been associated with a decline in participation. So I think we really have to think about the value of the technology we bring into the sport and more about the lifestyle we're actually sharing and that really truly most people want to enjoy. I've been lucky at Latitude to go on a lot of sails where I've hit 30, 40 knots. It's great for a joyride, but that's not what I'm going to take my wife and kids doing on the weekend. I mean, for us, it's a recreational family activity. And I think for 90% of sailors, 80% of sailors, that's true and will always be true. And so boats that serve that are going to really serve sailing as far as participation and growth.
Yeah, what I hear you say in that is that technology might be the enemy of accessibility. As people chase the higher tech, that then that's going to make sailing less accessible. And compared to the El Toro that you could build out of a 4x8 sheet of plywood,
Yeah.
and anybody could in their garage, over a weekend have a boat
Yeah, no, I mean,
very
you think about
inexpensively.
the Optimist or the El Toro when those were starting in whenever the 30s, 40s, 50s. Yeah, you could build it with a piece of plywood and you'd have a blast sailing it. But the price of doing an Opti program now or an El Toro program, I mean, they're high caliber things. You can certainly sail around and have a great time in a cheap plywood Opti and El Toro. But the name of the game in the competitive world and around the clubs and around the big promoters of those classes is a much more high tech, much more expensive boat than existed 40 years ago. And while that increases everybody's abilities in that tight niche of racers, it discourages, I think, a lot of people from sort of general hang loose, fun celebration and participation.
Yeah, it's, the value, the things that we get out of sailing and being able to participate and actually, compete, if it were, where you have a one design class and everybody is at the, basically the same level, I think can get lost when we're competing on dollars and technology.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here and talk about mental health. We have nearly 10% of American youth have severe or major depression, according to Mental Health America. And our suicide rates have been increasing since 1999. They're at their highest level in at least 40 years. Do you think that sailing can be an antidote to depression? Uh, and in what ways would that be the case? And what could be its advantages over other therapies?
Well, I'd say it's certainly true for me. Every time I go sailing, I consider it sailing therapy. I think you see boats named that as well. I think sailing truly is a great escape and a great way to sort of refresh your worldview. And certainly, I think for anybody with challenges, PTSD, or other mental health issues that come up, that this is a great path to finding sort of some relief and comfort with your own life, or whatever pathways that'll help you move forward. And I think, again, for what we talked about sailing earlier, the ingenuity, the attention that it requires, the ability to sort of focus where you are in the present on the forces working on you, it really helps bring your attention to the things right close to you, and not necessarily the world's worries that surround you, or the worries that come to you from other aspects of your life and history. And I think for kids, I think it is, again, self-reliance and those kinds of abilities. We have so many great programs around the Bay and anywhere up and down both coasts that help kids learn to sail. That's a great fun thing to learn, but I think it's all the other lifestyle attributes that come with it. I think many sports and sport in general offers a lot, but I think what's unique about sailing is that you are with a crewmate or a couple of crewmates, and you're really independent, and you've got to work with forces that are outside your control, and you've got to align yourself with them. So I think that's a really a great strong attribute of sailing. And then I think the people you meet in the community that sort of you rely on around you is also a powerful force for good for you. And I do think I'm definitely a very obviously biased sailor. I think sailing is just a force for good. I think the world would be a much better place if everybody was a sailor or had some time to spend sailing, because I think they'd get a much better appreciation for the challenges the world lays in front of us without any effort at all, what teamwork can do, and what your relationship to working with nature and Mother Nature really to sort of get your life working in alignment with that. And so many other things we do in nature, or sorry, in Earth, are sort of forcing nature or forcing our will on nature, as opposed to us figuring out how to work with it in our own human nature. So to me, sailing brings all those components with it. And of course, we also know there's science, technology, engineering, math, STEM, and as many want to add, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And I think that's also true. I mean, when I look at sailing, you see a lot of rocket scientists, engineers, but you also see poets and artists, adventurers, explorers, and all kinds of people get a lot of different things out of sailing. But at its roots, I think it's a really good foundation for just building a comfortable life with yourself and with others.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And you mentioned the STEM, so I just have to pull on that a little bit.
Of course.
Other things, about sailing, in addition to the STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math, are that it can be very athletic, can be very
Mm-hmm.
competitive in racing, and it can do a lot to teach and promote leadership, where you've got a boat with a crew on it. Um, can you discuss the ways you think sailing can inspire and be of value to young people, maybe teenagers or preteens, who've not yet chosen their direction in life and maybe could find something through sailing?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd take that in sort of two parts. I mean, I think from a character building, life foundation, sailing helps you build self-confidence and faith in yourself, self-reliance, and therefore an ability to take on challenges of all sorts, whatever career path you happen to take, whether you want to be a writer for a sailing magazine or whether you want to jump into corporate America and climb the ladder. I think sailing will be a good foundation for whatever you want to do. I also think there's a ton of great maritime professions. I mean, being a charter boat captain, doing the kinds, you've got a 100-ton license, you've taught a lot of people to sail, you've done your own cruising. I think there's a ton of careers that are missing in sailing that are available to people. The Spalding Marine Center in Sausalito has now started a apprenticeship program to bring more people into the marine trades. And I think, like a lot of the country, we've emphasized a lot of liberal arts colleges, which again provide a great foundation, but don't necessarily provide the technical skills we need to support the infrastructure, the maritime basics that we need. And I think we've underserved the trades and the other aspects of sailing or maritime trades that support the industry, from being a tanker captain to a sailing instructor to a tall ship captain. And so I think there's great fun things to be doing there, or being a welder at a boatyard, or doing fiberglass repair. So there's really a real good trade base of things if you want to work right in the sailing community. But also, I think as a sailor, you learn so many other things that are applicable outside of it. And as you say, I was an engineer. There's a ton of engineers. There's a lot of pilots who sail. A lot of people who sail also fly. A lot of people who are engineers. We have an article, I think in last month or this month, about rocket scientists who are also sailors. And so I think the creativity, ingenuity that comes with trying to figure out wind angles, currents, where your jib lead should be set, those are all intriguing puzzles to work out in your mind as you sail. And I think those kinds of analytical skills can also really apply in your work life, whether your work life involves boating or sailing, or whether your work life involves something completely different.
So now it sounds like we can use sailing to help find direction when we're younger, and we can use it to help maintain our cognitive abilities when we get older.
We hope so, although I might not be the correct person to test them as testimonial to that, but anyway.
And maybe our mental health along the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw in anecdotally, because you mentioned my 100-ton work, that I have conducted a survey of other marine professionals who are doing commercial work, to ask them how they got interested in it. And with only one exception, so I can't quite say 100%, but of the dozens of people I've asked, with that one exception, everybody has said they started recreationally. They all started as recreational sailors or boaters, and then got into it commercially because they loved being on the water. So you're talking about tanker captains, and I know, container ship captains who they started out sailing. A bar pilot who I raced with on his J111, right? They started by sailing recreationally and then got into it commercially because of that. So I'm going to just go into our wrap up here. But before we wrap up, I would like you to tell people, where can they find you? How can they find Latitude 38? Where can they hear your other podcasts and your information online and get your magazines?
Sure. Well, as you connect with the world these days, there's one and only one way to do it, and that's at the website, latitude38.com. And from there, you can go down the million rabbit holes that Latitude 38 has to offer, or that the internet has to offer. But you can find our magazine. We have a link on there for distribution, so you'll find a place on the water near you. There's a map there. So if you live near the water in California, you can probably find a yacht club, a marina, a marine chandlery near you that has a copy of the magazine. Of course, if you are on a boat and you aren't close to a marina that has one, Mexico or the South Pacific, you can read the magazine right online. We have our newsletter. We now have our podcast, which we launched yesterday. So we've got our first 3 episodes up, and like you, we're starting a podcast And we'll be getting hopefully one up a week on a regular basis and talking to our West Coast sailing community. And of course, I'm at john@latitude38.com. And also would love people to visit summersailstis.com, because if you're listening to this and you're liking sailing and want to share it as I do, I think one day a year, we ought to all hoist our sails. To me, Jim, as you know, we lament often how amazing it is to sail in California, and how many weekends you can go by a marina and see 90% or 95% of the sailboats sitting there not being used. And so every year on the June summer solstice, I try, along with a lot of great ambassadors and support from people all over the place, to get the whole world sailing on the solstice. And so look at summersailstis.com to see how you can connect to it where you are, or help other people connect to it and get the whole world sailing. Because at the end of the day, I do think sailing is a force for good. I think it'll enrich everybody's life individually and all of our lives together. And so I really hope people will connect with each other and help us all enjoy sailing and take the lessons of sailing and enjoy what's over the horizon.
Okay. Well, one thing you didn't mention, John, is that there's a crew party coming up on September 9th. Would you like to say a little bit about that before we go?
Thank you, Jim. We will be having a crewless party on Thursday, September 9th at the Bay Model in Sausalito. It will be outdoors, but it'll be an opportunity for people who own boats to connect with people who want to get on a boat. And Jim, I know the Sailing Science Center will be there, and they'll be able to meet you and hear what you're doing about that. And while I have the opportunity to say more on that too, I think what your initiative is with the Sailing Science Center is also terrific. I mean, all the lessons sailing has to teach in a lifestyle perspective. There's also the lessons that come from the science, technology, engineering, and math. And a science and sailing center will help us really visualize and utilize the tools and technologies that sailing brings to you, and get some good training. And I think it'll be great for students and kids to really expand their horizons too. So I think the Science and Sailing Center is a great initiative, and I really look forward to the day the doors open and people can come visit.
Well, thank you for that shameless plug, John. And it's much appreciated. I do want to just give a shout out to your Latitude 38 podcast, and suggest that people look for that on Google, and they can start to follow that. And as far as the Sailing Science Center podcast, we haven't set a particular schedule for that, but we will be continuing this process, probably with our monthly spotlights. And you probably have already seen, by the time you read or listen to this podcast, the spotlight on John Arndt in the September issue of the Sailing Science Center News. So John, I want to thank you for your time today. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I just heartily look forward to continuing to work with Latitude 38 and to see you out on the water.
Jim, well, thank you too. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, we've worked together for many, many years at this point, and it's been always a pleasure. I love your enthusiasm for sailing, the fact that you've taught so many people to sail yourself and also gone cruising. And of course, this new initiative with Science and Sailing just shows your continued passion for sharing something you enjoy. And that's kind of what Latitude wants to help do too, help you share your story and help other sailors share theirs. So to me, it's all a great community, and you're just one person that's helping make it even better. So thank you for this opportunity. And like you say, I'll see you on the water. I'll see you on the waterfront, and can't wait. Thanks for everything.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. The Sailing Science Center podcast is a production of the San Francisco Sailing Science Center. The interview was conducted by Jim Hancock. Production and editing was performed by Charlie Dice. Thank you for listening.